Thursday, 28 January 2021. Takeaway neon still buzzed along Cardiff's Newport Road when a battered hatchback from East London drifted to the curb outside 319 Newport Road, a disused GP surgery now crammed with more than 500 cannabis plants, street value around £120,000. Inside, a lone gardener jolted awake and thumb-dialed his Albanian bosses, setting a 5-minute fuse the raiders couldn't see burning. By 11:30, the counter-strike had played out, a baseball bat beating, a silver Mercedes C200 Sport tearing through side streets, and 23-year-old Tomasz Waga dumped face down on wet tarmac in Westville Road like a bag of rubbish, a judge would later say. The Mercedes vanished into the night and has never been found, but the killing launched a hunt that leapt borders to France, Germany, and Albania before ending, 2 years later, in a packed Newport Crown Court dock. The run to South Wales was a 3-hour blur down the M25 and M4. Headlights off at service stations, phones on airplane mode to stay invisible. By 10:30 p.m., they were parking 2 streets away from their target, adrenaline high and balaclavas already pulled low. Inside the building, Tomasz Waga and Carl Davies sliced through a ground floor window and began yanking whole plants into a bedsheet. Upstairs, unknown to them, the live-in gardener Heisland Aliage jolted awake, slipped out of a rear window and dialed the Albanian muscle on speed dial. His call set a 5-minute fuse the raiders never saw burning. Waga's crew worked methodically, clear a room, drag the crop, regroup. Yet, even in their rush, they missed the camera over the front door that captured their silhouettes and the car's partial plate as it crept away for a second sweep. Outside, cold drizzle began to fall, muting footsteps and washing pollen down the cracked Victorian pathway. At 22:45, the last pane of glass snapped. At 22:50, an incoming silver Mercedes was already threading through Cardiff backstreets toward the Grove. The hunters and the hunted were on the same block. The walls of the old surgery were about to explode in noise. What started as a low-risk taxing mission had, in less than an hour, become a collision course with an organized crime gang willing to kill to protect its cash crop. The London raiders were still inside when the first baseball bat hit the doorframe. There would be no clean getaway, only blood, panic, and a body dumped like rubbish before the clock struck 11. Inside 3119 Newport Road, the air was thick with the sweet rot of budding skunk, extractor fans rattling behind every plasterboard wall, black plastic sheeting fluttered where the raiders had sliced a window, sodium grow lamps cast a jaundiced glow over rows of chest-high plants. Heisland Aliage, the lone gardener, woke to the clatter, slid down a rear drain pipe, and thumb-dialed the only number that mattered. The call lasted 9 seconds, just long enough to say, "Po, grabitet, Haji spet, we're being robbed, come quick." Less than 5 minutes later, just after 10:30 p.m., a silver Mercedes nosed into the driveway. Out stepped Josif Nushi and Michal Dana, one gripping a 28-inch baseball bat, the other palming half a house brick he'd scooped from a flower bed. They burst through the warped front door, hydroponic humidity fogging their vision, but the soundtrack of crashing pots guided them straight to their prey. What followed was a brutal, room-to-room chase. Bats clanged off metal ducting, a bamboo cane snapped across Tomasz Waga's shoulder, shattered glass and spilt nutrients turning the linoleum into a skating rink. Waga absorbed at least 25 separate blows, head, mouth, ribs, arms, while Carl Davies caught a glancing strike to the skull before throwing himself out of an upstairs window into a neighbor's garden. With Davies gone, the gang focused on the bleeding 23-year-old sprawled amid upended grow bags. Nushi seized Waga's ankles, Dana hooked him under the arms, and together they dragged him down 2 flights of stairs, leaving a smear trail of blood and chlorophyll across the banisters. Outside, drizzle had begun to fall, useful for washing DNA from concrete. They heaved Waga into the rear of the Mercedes, slammed the door on his moans, and sped off toward the terraced grid of Pennyland. The entire assault, from first swing to screeching tires, lasted little more than 300 seconds. At 23:30, Thursday 28 January 2021, a silver Mercedes C200 Sport, registration BK09 RBX noses into the cul-de-sac of Westville Road, Pennyland. Rain freckles the bonnet, street lamps halo in the drizzle. The driver keeps the engine ticking over while 2 men jackknife a limp, blood-slicked Tomasz Waga sideways across the rear seat and roll him out of the near side door. He lands face down on the tarmac beside a line of recycling bins, Christmas fairy lights still blinking above the red brick terraces. By the time the doors slam, the tail lights are already ghosting toward Albany Road. That Mercedes has never been seen again despite nationwide appeals and a £5,000 Crime Stoppers reward. A lone dog walker rounds the corner minutes later, sees a motionless figure in the gutter and calls 999. First responders arrive to find 28 separate blunt force injuries, fractured ribs, smashed cheekbones, swelling to the brain. Paramedics work under lamplight, but can only confirm death at 11:38 p.m. A later post-mortem will record the mechanism of death as airway obstruction caused by massive bleeding. Waga quite literally suffocated on his own blood. South Wales police lock down 3 streets before the rain can wash evidence away. Doorbell cams yield grainy footage of the Mercedes circling twice. Tire tracks and a thin ribbon of blood mark where the body was dragged. By dawn, detectives have 3 active scenes: the grow house on Newport Road, the dump site on Westville Road, and a trail of ANPR hits leading east toward the M4. They issue the first public plea: find BK09 RBX. It holds the answers to who else was in that car. 4 years on, the car and at least 2 suspects remain missing shadows on a wet Cardiff night. Detectives started with the glow of a single doorbell camera. Grainy footage captured a silver Mercedes C200, registration BK09 RBX, circling Westville Road twice at 23:26 and again at 23:30, the minute Tomasz Waga was dragged from its rear seat and abandoned on the curb. Other household cameras stitched a blunt route map back to Newport Road, while ANPR hits fixed the same car hammering east past Cardiff Gate services 15 minutes later, then vanishing from the network altogether. Despite televised appeals and a £5,000 reward, that Mercedes has never resurfaced, giving the prosecution a tantalizing ghost vehicle to place at every critical waypoint. Inside the raided surgery, forensics found a violence-made breadcrumb trail. A 28-inch Louisville Slugger, later seized from Joseph Nushi's flat, carried Waga's blood spatter along the barrel and Nushi's sweat DNA in the taped grip. A half-brick lifted from the grow room floor bore Mihal Dana's palm print in dried nutrient residue. On the staircase, scene examiners photographed swirls of chlorophyll-rich hydroponic fluid mixed with arterial blood, then followed smeared boot impressions straight to the front steps, proving Waga had been dragged rather than walked out. One stray blue polyester fiber recovered from his ripped hoodie matched the lining of Nushi's North Face puffer, a microscopic confirmation that the men had come into body-to-body contact during the assault. The digital lattice was just as damning. Investigators overlaid burner phone call logs with ANPR timestamps and CCTV flashes to reconstruct a second-by-second choreography. At 22:30, Heisland Eliage's handset pinged a Newport Road mast for 9 seconds. The frantic Albanian phrase po grubitet, hide spate, before Nushi's and Dana's phones burst into life on the A48 inbound. Later, they were southeast of Dover, switching devices as they drove onto a freight ferry. The same IMEIs reappeared in Calais at dawn, Frankfurt by evening, and Tirana 48 hours later. Eurostar manifests, motorway toll cameras, and roaming data drip feeds meshed perfectly with that electronic breadcrumb trail, giving detectives jurisdictional leverage for European arrest warrants. Finally, the post-mortem froze the timeline in flesh and blood. A pathologist catalogued 25 blunt force injuries, 4 skull fractures, bilateral rib breaks, pulverized cheekbones, and ruled that Waga died from catastrophic airway blockage as blood flooded his throat within minutes of the beating. That scientific finality demolished defense suggestions that he might have staggered off and died elsewhere. The injuries were fresh, the bleeding still active when he hit the tarmac on Westville Road. Married to the fibers, the phone data, and the looping ghost of BK09 RBX, the pathology report pulled every loose thread tight until the story formed a noose none of the defendants could slip. The silver Mercedes vanished east along the M4. By 2 a.m., it had flashed past the Thames Valley ANPR net, and 4 hours later, rolled onto a Calais freight ferry under a different set of plates. Telephony mapping later showed Nushi, Dana, and Aliage switching burner handsets the moment their tires hit French soil, the first digital breadcrumb in a chase that would cross 3 countries and keep South Wales police on Interpol's speed dial for 2 years. Detectives secured European arrest warrants within a fortnight, circulating red notice packets to Paris, Frankfurt, and Tirana. The French hit came first. In July 2021, armed officers lifted Nushi and Dana in a Paris suburb, their hotel room still lined with vacuum-sealed cash and Albanian passports. Both men fought extradition but were flown to Heathrow in handcuffs 6 weeks later. Aliash ran farther. slipping across the Adriatic by coach. He hid in the mountains outside Tirana until January 2022, when Albanian state police raided a relative's flat at dawn. Court documents record a 9-hour convoy through the Balkans before he was handed to UK officers at Rennes International Airport. Proof, prosecutors said, that even a homeland refuge offered no sanctuary once the murder warrant was live. Meanwhile, German federal police detained a fourth associate during a routine traffic stop on the A5 near Frankfurt. The arrest did not yield a murder charge, but it confirmed intelligence that the cannabis factory network stretched deep into continental Europe. South Wales police would later praise their counterparts, noting that arrests in Albania, France and Germany fed critical evidence back into the Cardiff case file. By the time Nushi, Dana and Alijaj stood in the dock at Newport Crown Court, the prosecution timeline included immigration stamp data, motorway toll logs, roaming phone analytics and JetBridge CCTV from 5 airports. In Detective Superintendent Mark O'Shea's words, "International lines were no barrier. We chased people across Europe and brought them home." The jury needed little more persuasion. The defendant's own flight paths became the strongest confession money could not buy. The oak-paneled Court 1 at Newport Crown Court was packed before 10 a.m., family in the public gallery, clutching photos of a smiling Tomasz Waga, armed officers on the door, council reporters jostling for bench space. 8 weeks earlier, on 14 December 2022, a jury had convicted Joseph Nushi and Mihal Dana of murder and wounding, and Heisland Alijaj of manslaughter and unlawful wounding. Now Mr. Justice Cotter entered to deliver sentence. Reading from a thick bundle of notes, the judge described Waga's final moments with chilling brevity. Just before 11 p.m. on 28 January 2021, his body was dumped from a Mercedes onto a Cardiff pavement like a bag of rubbish. He spoke of a merciless beating for profit, of a young father robbed of the chance to watch his son take his first steps. Then came the numbers. Nushi, 28, life, minimum 20 years. Dana, 29, life minimum 16 years. Alijaj, 31, 10 years, 2/3 to be served before parole. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The defendants stared at the floor through Albanian interpreters. In a victim impact statement read by counsel, Waga's sister Patricia told the court she replayed the nightmare every time I close my eyes. His lifeless, battered face, the inhumane way he was thrown away. She spoke of their parents' lifelong heartache, of hair lost to stress, and of a toddler who will mark every Father's Day beside a cemetery stone. Many in court dabbed at tears. The defendants showed none. Prosecutor Greg Bull, KC, reminded the judge that the cannabis factory had netted around £120,000 per crop, and that the gang's determination to protect it at any cost spanned 3 countries and 2 years. Defense Silks pleaded no premeditation. A response to provocation, said one, but the judge was unmoved. Organized crime, flight across Europe, and an attempt to erase the silver Mercedes all stripped away any mitigation. Detective Superintendent Mark O'Shea addressed cameras on the court steps afterwards. International borders, he said, had proved no barrier. Arrests in France, Germany, and Albania fed evidence back to Cardiff and brought these men home to face justice. Behind him, Waga's family clutched each other, relieved yet hollow. The sentences were heavy, but as Patricia whispered, no number gives Tommy back. The convictions did not slam the file shut. Within weeks of the January 2023 sentences, detectives made it clear that the story of 319 Newport Road was bigger than 3 men and 1 night's savagery. A £10,000 Crime Stoppers reward was relaunched in March 2022, this time naming 2 facilitators, Artan Palucci and Eladin Elizi, and renewing the plea for information on the silver-grey Mercedes C200, registration BK09 RBX, which investigators still believe holds key forensic traces. The charity's appeal described the vehicle as possibly sold on, cloned or burnt out, but emphasized that somebody knows where it ended up. That pressure paid off 12 months later. In March 2023, South Wales police confirmed the arrest of Elizi, 23, in East Finchley, London. He was charged with taking part in the organised crime group OCG and breaching bail. Palucci, 31, had been picked up in the capital a month earlier and also remanded. Although neither man faces a murder count, prosecutors say their evidence plugs gaps in the escape logistics and may yet pinpoint the missing car's last journey. Meanwhile, the ripples spread beyond Cardiff. On 3 August 2023, at Cardiff Crown Court, Ajit Mihala, 43, and his nephew Ardit Mihala, 26, were jailed for 3 and 5 years respectively, after a parallel probe proved they bankrolled and serviced the Newport Road grow. The court heard that the Mahala cell laundered at least £48,000 in cash and kept a stable of vehicles on standby to move crops, a reminder that Waga's death sat inside a much wider criminal economy. Detective Superintendent Mark O'Shea told reporters the case had become one of the most complex and far-reaching investigations this force has ever undertaken, with evidence packages flown in from France, Germany and Albania to secure the OCG convictions. And yet one emblem of that night refuses to surface. Despite dozens of searches of scrapyards, export yards and woodland fire sites, BK09 RBX has eluded every ANPR sweep since it slipped out of Cardiff in the early hours of 29 January 2021. The vehicle's absence keeps an open line in the Waga case file and keeps the reward money hanging, unclaimed 4 years on, as O'Shea repeats at each anniversary appeal, no one dumps a car into thin air, find the Mercedes, and you finish the story.